Welcome, welcome. This is Kim Ades, and I'm the president of Frame of Mind Coaching, and you have just joined us at the Frame of Mind Coaching podcast. Today, I have a co-host. His name is Taylor Jobe, and
Hello.
Taylor is, sorry?
Oh, I said hello. Sorry.
Oh, hi. Taylor is in California. You'll get a feel of his California groove, but he's one of our coaches, a formidable frame of mind coach. I would say that Taylor is not just a frame of mind coach, but he is one of our most, I would call him the most intuitive coach. It comes to him naturally. It comes to him from a very, very deep, natural, instinctive place. And I love that about him. But Taylor, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, like, you're in California, you're coaching for us, you're not doing it full time. What are you doing other than coaching, for starters?
Yeah, so other than coaching and other than being a dad, which takes up a lot of time, I, in my real life, I guess, is I'm a financial advisor and do some business analysis as well.
Okay, and you run your business. It's a family business.
Yep.
And so that's your full-time gig.
That's right, yeah.
But it wasn't always your full-time gig.
That's correct.
You were doing something completely different, and that's really
right.
when we met.
Yes, it was.
So I just want to give everybody a little bit of history, and then I'm going to hand it over so you can tell the story. So I was in New York for an EO event. I was doing a presentation, and Taylor was one of the participants.
Mm-hmm.
And after he heard me speak and do my little song and dance, he ended up signing on for coaching with Dave, who's another one of our amazing coaches. And so it's amazing how everybody's kind of connected to one another. But you started your coaching journey, and like, what made you even sign up for coaching? What was going on for you at the time?
Yeah, so at the time, the business that I had was a visual effects business. So we did productions and visual effects for really commercial and film. So I found myself being really the only business person, so to speak, in the room on a team of creatives. And so after a few years of that got me to the point of feeling a little isolated, a little alone, and started seeking out other communities and mentorship or coaching. I wasn't really sure what I was looking for, quite honestly. I just knew I needed something else. That's partly what led me to EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And while I was in that group was when obviously I heard you. And the reason I came to that session was really around mentorship and coaching, right? And how, because that's what I was looking for. And just going through, I remember you had some journaling exercises that we did in the room. And I always tell myself I just don't really like writing, but I did them, and it was frightening how effective it was. After just a couple sentences of the prompt, it sort of woke me up to say, okay, there's something to this. Even just the journaling part of it, that's not something I had done before, nor had I thought I would ever do, but it was powerful enough that that's why I came up and talked to you afterwards and said, I got to know more.
Do you remember what prompt it was?
I don't remember which prompt it was. Yeah, this is about 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yeah, I have a sneaky suspicion. It sounded kind of something like, what is it that you really, really want?
I always hated that one. Because
you hated that one.
Actually, that was the one in the question that kept coming up in my coaching that I noticed I kept deferring answering. That is a much more difficult question to answer than it sounds.
It's a very difficult question to answer because, number one, a lot of people don't take the time to really think about what they want. And then number two is that a lot of people don't feel comfortable claiming what they really want, right? Like, they want to just kind of tuck it away and say, well, that's a pipe dream. That's unrealistic. That's never going to happen. Who am I to actually want that big, huge, grand dream?
That's absolutely it, right? And at first, we think a lot of times we want things is a lot of the first thing that comes up, but I think we know that isn't right, and so we kind of don't know where to go from there. We go, I want a house or a car, but as soon as we say it, I think we all kind of realize, well, that doesn't really do it. And you're right. The second part of it is embedded in that question of what do you want is the assumption that you should deserve to get it, right? It's not stated, but that's sort of assumed, and I think that's a big block as well. Is people we can think faster than we can talk a lot of times, or write. And so when we hear the question, what do I want? We start shutting down options before we even say it, because we go, I can never have those things. So that was part of why it was difficult to answer.
So that's interesting. I just want to go back for a second. So we do ask our clients to journal. And one of the things you just said is we think faster than we can write. And actually, over and above all the incredible benefits journaling does in the coaching process, journaling also acts as a means to slow down your brain. So kind of like meditation. And so what happens is that when you are actually journaling, your brain has to pause in between words. So journaling is a form of meditation. Really interesting.
Yeah, that was part of what I immediately got out of it. I said, even in that workshop, was because it's, you can hear the way I speak. Sometimes I'll speak quickly and sort of speak as I think, but it's really inappropriate to leave a half-written sentence. My mom was an English teacher, so I always felt a responsibility to finish the thought, right? So when you start writing a sentence, I felt compelled to finish it, which means I then had to finish the thought. And a lot of times when I would finish the thought, I would read the sentence and go, oh my gosh, do I really think that? Is that for real? And then that would kick off the next sentence, literally, which would be, do I really think that? And that is part of the power of journaling. That's what I tell people I'm coaching, is part of it is just you get to slow down your thinking enough so you can see it, get it outside of you, and actually respond to it then.
Wow, that's brilliant. I have a question for you. When you were going through coaching with Dave at the time, like, what was going on for you other than the fact that you were seeking other people and you felt isolated? Was there something happening at the time? Like, I wasn't your coach, so I don't know all the the juicy details, but what was happening that was causing you to feel like maybe, hey, I want something different, or something's not right, or I am frustrated?
Yeah. So we were probably 3 years into a business that I had with a business partner, and it was that feeling of I was putting more and more time in, but literally felt like I was getting less and less out of it. And after enough years and months of that, I realized this is not sustainable for me, right? That the answer isn't work harder and do more or be more effective. I literally, went through all of the productivity books, and some of them were helpful. Most of them are tools and tactics, which just weren't doing it for me. And I'd try it, and it would get me so far, and I just sort of was stuck. Again, I just remember that feeling of putting in 10, 12 hours a day, and the more I put in, it felt like the further behind I was. And so I just needed something. That's why I say I didn't know what I was looking for. I just needed some other perspective, because I was clearly missing something. There was clearly some blind spot that was holding me back, which was another one of the big things that I got, frankly, out of that first session with you, was the whole idea of, I don't have a work problem or a business partner problem. I have a thinking problem, right? And that's what really kind of struck me to say, okay, what is that, right? What is that concept, and what do I do about it? And so that was the second part of it that really, from a coaching perspective, got me going.
Well, that's one of the things that I tell everybody. Every problem is really a thinking problem. So when you have a problem with someone else, or when you have a strategy problem, or when you have a problem with your kids, or when you have a problem with your health, like, all of that is a reflection essentially of a thinking problem. We start with our thinking, and then when we go to that seed, we're able to see clearly the next steps or the next moves. But when we take full responsibility for our thinking, everything changes.
Right. Well, and what fundamentally changes is it takes everything back into me, into my wheelhouse, into things that I can control. And that's, empowerment is a word that comes up a lot. And for me, it's recognizing my own choice in a matter is really where my empowerment or power comes from. So anytime go for it.
No, continue.
Yeah, I was gonna say, anytime I started using that as a reference point to say, okay, if I feel like I don't have control, what am I missing here? What am I focusing on? It was probably something outside of my control, right? And so, but if I go back to thinking, right, thinking what I think, what I feel, and what I do, those are three things that I can control. So I can always reframe any challenge in that context. It's not fun all the time. It's not easy. It doesn't necessarily even make it hurt any less depending on what it is, but it does give me a way forward that I have complete control over. That's to me what got unlocked during when I got coached.
So you were in this business, you were working really hard, you were getting less and less out of it. And so like, what did you kind of learn, or what woke
Sure.
up for you in coaching?
Yeah. So I was the business partner and the other partner was the creative partner. And that dynamic of me and them became a big theme, recurring theme of coaching, which I kind of took for granted because I thought, well, of course, a business partner, there's going to be some challenges. But the way it kept coming up was me sort of saying this story that, well, I'm not getting what I want because of him, of his performance. And then that got a little clearer. And then it was, well, I'm not getting what I want because, and it turned into, I'm not happy, I'm frustrated because he doesn't, he's not trustworthy, for example. The big things always got done, but it was the little things. Oh, sure, I'll get that done by Thursday. Well, it wouldn't happen. Well, let's get that done by Wednesday. It wouldn't happen. And that was where I realized a lot of this pain was coming from, this idea that, well, I'm frustrated because he's not living up to what he said he was going to do. That was a big block for me and kept getting stronger and stronger as I kept identifying it.
So if you're in a partnership, because I mean, the people who are listening right now, a lot of them are business owners, they're executives, they're in relationships with professional relationships with partners, with colleagues, etc., who may or may not be holding up their end of the deal. So, so how do you wrap your head around that? Where did you come to a place of clarity, understanding, and peace? I mean, you're in a business.
Yeah.
This guy's not, let's call it, pulling his weight.
Right.
How do you deal with that?
Well, there's two ways. One was, I would always say to Dave, my coach, well, he should do this. And Dave would say, well, clearly he doesn't. He doesn't need to do it because he's not doing it. He didn't do it. And the world didn't end. So he doesn't need to do it. So that was a big thing, was realizing how many shoulds and needs and have to and musts that I had that were just frankly not true, right? And not helpful at all. Not constructive was really sort of the key thing. That was the first big realization that I had, was that just because I think it should doesn't mean it should or that it will, right? Arguing with reality is a position I've learned to not put myself in anymore. That was a big one. That kind of opened me up to saying, okay, Dave would try to get me to articulate. Well, I tried to articulate what I was feeling, my frustration, without referencing somebody else, because I was always saying, I'm frustrated because he blank.
Right. So in other words, stop blaming anybody else.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But I could only do that once I got rid of the shoulds, because if I got too caught up in, well, he should be doing it, I had to get past that first and say, well, he did. So do I want to live in my dreamland in my head, or do I want to live in reality? And I decided, okay, let's deal with reality. And then it became, I was frustrated because what he did or didn't do. And as I kept playing around with that, saying, I'm frustrated because he doesn't live up to his up to his commitments. I'm frustrated because he blank. What I finally circled back on was, I chose to get into business with somebody that I didn't trust, right? Or I chose to get into business with somebody that I don't think I should have gotten into business with, right? But all of a sudden I was able to reframe it in a way that it was completely back in my wheelhouse again. Now, that's a painful realization, because as soon as I said that out loud, it forced me to take responsibility for choosing to be frustrated for the last 3 years. And that's a big emotional hurdle to get through. But as soon as I identified that, I realized that freedom was just simply a matter of, okay, well, then I've got to figure out another arrangement here.
Well, so there's two parts to that, right? So I want to just slow this down, because you're a pretty advanced learner and you apply quickly. But to go back, when you say the past 3 years of my life, I've been living in a frustrated way. What I tell my clients is, yes, you are handing the keys of your emotional well-being, of your happiness, to someone else, right? So you're allowing them to determine by their actions whether or not you decide to be happy or not.
Yes.
And so being at this crossroads, you get choices, right? The word choice keeps coming up.
Right.
And so there are two choices. One is create a different arrangement. Hey, this isn't working for me. I'm going to go do something else. I'm at peace with the way you are. You're not going to change, and I don't need you to change in order for me to be happy, but this isn't working for me, so I'm going to go somewhere else. So that's choice number one. Choice number two is, I know you're going to be who you are, and I accept it, and I'm not going to use that as my reason for being frustrated or annoyed. I'm just going to figure out a way to understand it and work alongside of it, but never use it as my trigger for getting frustrated, unhappy, disappointed, or pissed off, right? So those are the two options really right there. But in both options, you are taking responsibility for the way you feel.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's not easy to do.
No, not at all. And this, I'm pretty clear on what happened. This was, 4 or 5 years ago now, but I run into this version of this on a daily basis, right? I mean, one of your sayings that I love, that took me a while, frankly, to love, was you always say you're using somebody else as an excuse to feel bad.
Yeah. You're
right.
using someone else as your excuse to feel miserable.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Yeah.
And here's the thing, like, as leaders take responsibility for everything, right? They take responsibility for revenue, for the team, for hiring, for firing, for strategy, for product development. Like, they're taking responsibility for everything. And what they're not very good at taking responsibility for, because it's an undeveloped skill, is responsibility for their emotional state. So when things go wrong, they believe it's a great reason to get upset, to fly off the handle, to lose their temper, to get depressed, to crawl into their shell, to say life sucks, all of that, right? So they use those external circumstances or events that take place as their reason, as their very good reason, right, for feeling out of sorts. And we say, hold on a second, you don't necessarily need to take responsibility for all those things, for product development, for your team, for all of those things. There are other people who could step in to those roles, but nobody could step in to taking responsibility for your own emotional state. That's your job and your job alone.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is, when you take responsibility, for me, when I started taking responsibility for my emotional state and stopped blaming other people, I realized all these ways that I was just wrong previously. So for example, when I use the example of, I couldn't trust my business partner, as soon as I separated myself from that and I said, well, look, I'm upset because I chose to get into a situation that I either regret or wish I hadn't in the first place. I was able to see what he was doing and realize that, look, what he was doing was the appropriate thing for the business. His job was creative. His job was to, above all else, uphold the creative quality of the work. That was his job, right? His job wasn't, frankly, even to make sure we made the deadline. His job was to be creative. And so what I realized was my story that, he wasn't doing his job, so to speak, was flat wrong. He was exactly doing his job, but I was asking him to do other things that had nothing to do with his job, and in some ways were counterproductive, because giving him these deadlines and these other requirements and asking him to make these little insignificant commitments were not helping with what his primary goal was, which was have this stuff look as good as possible. So
there's two things there, right?
Yeah.
Number one is this whole idea of, like, really looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing what you're creating and kind of noticing, hey, my emotional state is a reflection of me creating something I don't actually want. So what does that mean? I kind of want to slow down because it's a little complex, but when you feel bad, when you feel frustrated, mad, sad, pissed off, annoyed at the world, that's an indicator that you're creating or you're thinking about things in ways that actually contradict your very desire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's a sign that we need to pay attention to. But the second thing is, like, again, looking in the mirror and going, holy crap, this is not what I want to be creating, and I'm taking responsibility for it. That is not easy.
No.
It's hard.
Right. That's what I was saying earlier. Yeah, it's hard. It doesn't, just because it becomes clear doesn't mean it's suddenly easy.
Yes, but what happens is the moment you do that, it's like life gets lighter.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I can breathe now.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's one more thing that you said that I kind of want to play around with.
Yeah.
The whole idea of, I got into this situation, this business arrangement that I think maybe I shouldn't have, or I kind of regret. So I'm not a fan of regret. I don't think regret is ever useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would call that a gateway experience. So what
Mm-hmm.
is a gateway experience? It's an experience that maybe while it's not ideal, leads me to a better place, leads me to the next thing, the next opportunity,
Okay.
the next kind of opening door. So like I, the whole idea of regret doesn't make us feel so good, doesn't lead us to anywhere great. So what was that experience for? What did it teach us? What did it lead us
Yeah.
to? Who did I become as a result of that experience? And that's what I'm always interested in.
Yeah, because regret is always backwards looking in nature too, which is not constructive moving forward, right? It's just going back, and you can rehash it, but it isn't going to actually get you anywhere new necessarily, right? What the question that I then started asking was not beating myself over why did I do this and now I should regret it. It was okay, so why not just leave? What's keeping me here, right? And the other really big thing I realized out of all this was that I had this story that, I was basically attaching my personal worth to that of the business. And so I had put this requirement that the business has to be this, hyper growth new company that we're going to exit for some, multiple. That was always sort of game plan, the story that I kept telling myself. And somewhere along the way, the story became, well, and if the business is a failure, then I am a failure. And I didn't realize that was going on. But as soon as I recognized well, the success or failure of the business doesn't have to be a commentary on me as a person. That's a choice I can make, right? As soon as I separated those two things, that was sort of the final piece for me that gave me that, as you said, space or freedom to be able to finally answer the question, what do I want? Right?
That's pretty amazing. Like
Yeah.
it's freeing.
Yes. Yeah. And so it was a couple of stages, right? It was a couple of those things. It was getting over shoulds. It was taking ownership over my emotional state. And then it was finally giving myself the freedom to say, okay, what is it that I want without any attachment to anything that has happened in the past? And that's the other challenge of trying to come up with what you want is you feel responsibilities or commitments or things like that, that we limit what we're actually willing to ask
Well,
for.
that's using the shoulds, but pointed inwardly, right? Like, so I
Right.
shouldn't leave. I should stay. I have responsibility. I'm supposed to. They expect me to, and then the flip of that is, so where am I going to go?
Right.
What does it mean if I leave? What does it mean about me? And, all that stuff.
Exactly. And those were things that, again, I think I was thinking faster than I could say them prior to coaching and would keep me trapped in this box of, okay, fine, I just have to make this business work.
Okay. So you moved from New York to California, massive change. Does it feel better, more aligned for you?
Yeah. So it's funny because right after that with the business, what happened is he and I basically had two different visions for the business. And at that point, I basically said, look, anything I can do to support the direction you want to go, let me know. And I'm actually still an owner in the business, but he's been running it his way. And the funny thing is, as soon as I did that, I realized, oh man, his approach has some huge benefits over mine. Once I was able to stop making it about me, right? And I was like, actually, that's a really, really good idea, the way he's been doing it. And he's a few years into that, and he's had some pretty good success so far. So that set me to actually, ask the question of what do I want? And what ended up happening in my life looks like a lot of individual different things: getting married, moving, new business, having kids pretty quickly, all within a, 18-month period of time that people on the outside were like, wow, that's a lot of transition. That's a lot going on. But in my mind, it was all just the execution of what I wanted. So
Yeah.
for me, it was just one thing, right? And I literally took some time to sit down and identify what is it that I want. And I took that question seriously and actually tried to answer it. And everything from moving, new business, kids, getting married was all just sort of the outcome of that. So they weren't really even in the experience, they weren't individual big things. It was just, this is me just moving closer to what I want, which always feels I was going to say good, but that's too cheap, right? It always feels right. You
Yeah.
know, it
Yeah.
doesn't, it takes work, but it doesn't take energy. It actually gives you energy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
That's a
hasn't
good way
felt
to
like a
put it.
lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah. So one more question, because I'm looking at the time, but one more question. You decided to get certified as a coach. Like, so you're doing your thing, you're in the, what do you call it? The film and what
And
kind of business?
production.
Yeah,
Yeah.
film production business. You moved to California, like, and in the midst of all of this, you decide, hey, I should learn how to coach. Like, what's the relationship between getting coached and learning how to coach?
Yeah. So there were a couple close people to me that saw my progression during coaching, and basically at the end of it were like, what happened to you? Like, you gotta,
In a good way, right?
and in a good way, and they see the outcome, and they're like, you gotta explain to me what happened. And I was literally, at the time, I was like, I don't know, right? Because I couldn't articulate it. I went through it, but I experienced it, but I didn't, you don't learn it per se, right? And that was why I reached out to you. And I remember saying, Kim, I want to go through the training. I don't want to be a coach. I just want to learn the framework. And lo and behold, along the way, doing the training, doing some of the practicing, I realized the value of coaching, right? And the value of mentoring, the value of whatever word you want to put on it. But it's that old saying, if you really want to try and learn something, try to teach it. And
Right.
it's a phenomenal way for me to keep my head in the game along the way. So
I
it's,
totally understand that.
yeah.
I have always said that frameline coaching is like literally my playground, my gym, me. Like I created
Yes,
it
of
just
course.
for me, just so
Right.
that I could keep my head in the game.
Absolutely.
That's all that it's
Absolutely.
there
Well,
for.
that was one of the first things I think we talk about in going through coaching is why do you coach, right? And
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, is recognizing that, and that just because I want to get something out of it doesn't mean the client can't. They're not at odds. We should be completely aligned, and you can't get any better alignment than both of us wanting to get as much out of this as possible.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up coaching.
And how has it affected your parenting, which is my most
Oh
exciting?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's huge, right? I mean, I just see it's funny because I always say it doesn't matter when people first think about coaching. They go, well, should I come with a business problem? Should it be a personal problem? And I tell them it doesn't matter because it's all going to point back to the same set of beliefs and the same mechanism, right? And so
That's right.
a lot of these principles that I experienced and then learned through the coaching training, I just get to relearn every day with my kids. And they're 1 year old and 2.5, and they're incredible teachers from that perspective, and keeping me from taking myself too seriously. So it's a huge, looking at it like that I can't say whether I've been a better or worse parent because I would obviously then have to say I'm better. But I certainly notice that when I apply these principles to myself as a parent, I get much more out of it, and it seems that they do as well. So.
And at the end of the day, like, we're all in this life to achieve something, to do something, to experience something. But the wealth of our lives, I think, and this is a personal bias, comes from the relationships we have. And I think the single most important relationships are those we have with our immediate family, our kids, our spouse, etc. And so, yes, coaching definitely helps you make business decisions, helps you make personal or professional decisions. But I would say that the biggest impact is that it changes the entire nature and course of your relationships.
Yeah, and it changes your relationship with yourself as well. And once you do that, everything else, all of a sudden work, who I am as a dad, a husband, a son, all these things aren't individual problems for me to solve, which is the traditional approach. It's no, once I start cleaning up my things, all of a sudden, I can do that here and do that there and do that there. So yeah.
Amazing. Taylor, this was great, but I want you back so that we can talk about you as a coach and the sort of sometimes challenges you see your clients experiencing. So next time we'll have you back. So maybe next month. But thank you so much for being here. It was so fun. I loved hearing the story. I knew the story, but I loved hearing it again. I think with a little more color and a little more detail, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And whoever's listening, please, if you're interested in learning more about coaching, if you're interested in getting a firsthand flavor of Frame of Mind Coaching, go to frameofmindcoaching.com. Right there on the front page is a complimentary coaching call. That call will knock your socks off. You will see things you have never seen before. You will be able to start to lift up a mirror and look at yourself in a completely different way. So again, frameofmindcoaching.com. Taylor, thank you so much for being here, and I am sure we will have more conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thank you for everything you do and everything you put together.